So we now know for a fact that Jon Stewart of The Daily Show not only committed the exact same. As somebody who's had narcissists try to steal my intellectual property, and the way that they handle being around people that are more intelligent than them is very concerning. Because, see, we have a Pentagon, and there's going to be people in leadership positions that make strategic choices. Now, we went through what's called a Cold War. And, during the 50s, Russia was playing with 100 megaton weapons. And to put that in perspective, Hiroshima was like 14 kilotons. Now, what happens when the physicists are kicked out of the meetings because of some narcissistic leadership, that would go ahead and initiate World War III just because, of our chain of command? Well, you see, let's just say there's a storage facility, and how many warheads are in there, and what's the total payload? And if they don't understand the math or the physics, well, we could just be one target away from an extinction level event, because the Tsar Bomba had a mushroom cloud that reached past the stratosphere, and a destructive force that created a 3 times around the globe shockwave in a nuclear fire 10 times the heat of the sun that might have been 5 miles wide. So that was 50 megatons. And if something like that hit, say, LA, well, California would be having some real problems. And so when you think about this and you think about the ignorance of human beings, Mr. Global, I love having voices like yours out there. But man, our education system, the cognitive dissonance, is because the subconscious dehumanizing effects of war and fear-mongering is causing people to live in a fantasy deluded world, and left versus right is not going to be what it is anymore. This is more than just politics. This is just darkness. And the battleground is not going to be a war. It's not going to be right versus left. It's not us versus them. It's confronting the ignorance of the fact that my dog can play with a cat and have little dogs and big dogs, and they don't get fight or flight reactions because of the color of the skin. They don't look at a human being and say it's an illegal or collateral damage. They're not stupid enough to think that blowing up people in Iraq is something that gives us freedom here. And so human beings are sequestered in these fight or flight paradigms of just perpetual fear and reactivity. And we got a civilization that has exploited that to the point of making people into mindless consumers that could be bribed with their fantasy futures. And whether the fantasy is heaven or meeting Allah or, making America great or saving the soul of America or change, we keep living into some fantasy futures that are deviant from one another. And our entitlements and our desires to be right about reality, where we actually think that our beliefs, our dogmas, even pertaining to knowledge, even pertaining to history, even pertaining to psychology, even pertaining to everything we think we know. And what you're seeing here is that people like you that have objectivity and the voice of reason get silenced, get dehumanized, because the inconvenience the truth is to the ego, an inconvenience to the false reality of somebody whose entire architecture of their worldview came from a think tank, and they're wearing campaign memorabilia 4 years after their daddy figure who is there to protect them as they stockpile weapons for some kind of race war or whatever they think is happening. And they're afraid of Montezuma's revenge. They're scared of somebody that speaks a different language and has a different skin color. And they're mad because they see LeBron on TV and he used to be in the backyard doing all their work for them. Well, this is the world we live in. And so we have to have voices like yours, start to make it into leadership, that we cannot wait for Congress. I've got inventions. Okay, I understand green energy. I understand biology. I've got a 2,000 horsepower car out here, Mr. Global. And I designed an oiling system so I could run rapeseed oil on a 2,000 horsepower engine. Oh, I've got coolant systems on it so I can bring the oil temperature and the engine temperature to within range to where it doesn't oxidize. And the viscosity that changes rapidly as a function of temperature, well, I open up the bearing clearances and I use pulsed modulated external oil pumps. So rapeseed oil is now viable because I can control the temperature with coolant pumps from a Tesla. I got a water box that uses an AC evaporator core and a remote mount condenser into the back. Works nice for my intake air temperatures. And I already run ethanol that comes from corn, where I've designed things that would, essentially convert sewage into unlimited energy via the genesis of glucose. And of course, we can just ferment that. And, burning alcohol makes carbon dioxide and water, but the algae makes a lot of oxygen. And so here's my car. 2,000 horsepower, 1985 Mustang. There's my coolant system with an evaporator core in it. There's the oil pumps. Okay, so this is my main primary pump that primes the engine. Works out pulse width modulation with the computer. My oil pump is a regular oil pump in the pan, and this is a scavenger pump that runs the oil through a filter before it fills up a little 4-quart tank. And so now my computer can control the oil volume to supplement the volume to increase the pressure as the viscosity goes down. But I can control that, so I don't need additives in rapeseed oil. And there you go. That's a 2,000 horsepower 85 Mustang that can run on green energy and can run on vegetable oil in the crankcase. It doesn't require scientists to figure out how to modify the oil to change its properties to make it more like petroleum. And so I run my cars on E85. But I'm like, what if I just, a swimming pool of algae has 72 square kilometers of surface area for gas transfer. By using solar power to generate additional light from all vectors, like a tank that just immerses it, now we can increase the photosynthetic rate of these single cell organisms. And, and then I aerate the oil. And so what I do is, instead of relying on the partial pressures to diffuse through the ocean that makes 70% of our oxygen with algae, the aeration increases infinitely the surface area of gas transfer. So now I control the metabolic rate with computers using oxygen analyzers. So oxygen analyzers and carbon dioxide, so we can see how much the differential is, how fast are these algae growing, and how much sugar can they produce by using light to generate glucose through photosynthesis. Instead of sending our sewage out to the ocean to create unnatural bacterial blooms so we can avoid swimming in it and avoid E. coli while looking at, offshore drill rigs, we can now set up every single sewage treatment plant as a solar-powered algae generating factory. And if we wanted to even investigate my ecosystems, well, I also have one that includes yeast and includes light sensors to detect the growth of algae on a longitudinal axis. And we can control the flow rate of the nutrient-dense fertilizer generated from sewage, and we can recycle all food items to make ethanol. This is my 2,000 horsepower green machine, something that runs on E85, but I can run it on pure ethanol because it has a flex fuel composition sensor. It has paddle shifters, an air-to-water intercooler setup from a Pro Mod, and my Tesla-powered water box that makes ice water that I use for cooling the intake air temperatures. But, I also use that for pulse width modulating fluid heat extractors. Fluid heat extractors for the radiator and for the transmission. And then my engine oil also has, an oil cooler too. And so by pulse width modulating external oil pumps, I could increase the bearing clearances so that at low temperatures, the higher viscosity vegetable oil will have normal operating oil pressures. And then this pump just kicks up its duty cycle to maintain the commanded oil pressure. So now I've got a 2,000 horsepower car that produces carbon dioxide and water from alcohol, which is no different than you and I drinking it. And I'd rather take a shot of pure ethanol than 91 octane. And so here's my twin turbo 85 Mustang. And I'm here in California. And I would take this and put it on a smog test and see how it does versus the original V6 engine. I could put catalytic converters on it, but I wonder what just burning clean alcohol would look like compared to petroleum. And so this is what I do. And the narcissists and these bastards sabotage and try to steal my intellectual properties, but it won't matter. Can't stop me. Ask me about my school shooter alarm system if you want to know how I'd stop that immediately with strobe lights and triangulating exact locations of sounds at the onset of muzzle fire. Got a lot of inventions. It's about time they get out.